Hi everybody, I'm Alyse, Price-Tobler. I'm a clinical psychotherapist and an adult survivor of severe parental alienation, as is Dawn. And welcome to another one of our interviews with another adult survivor of parental alienation, Tessa Sarich. And she's going to be speaking about what it was like for her growing up with two parents who divorced and a mum who actually blamed her for a lot of the violence that came her way from her father. So blamed the child, the baby, for that. So that's the interview that we're about to step into now. So thank you for joining us. And yeah, hopefully we'll all learn a lot from today's session.
Yes, I think we will. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, so today let's also talk about what do you know about parental alienation, Tessa? And also, have you had any experience yourself about parental alienation? Yeah.
Yes. Well, parental alienation is like when a parent stops a child from seeing the other parent, and they use all sorts of excuses and say how the other parent is such a bad parent, etc., stuff like that.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, when my dad and mum were still together, my dad was an alcoholic and he used to beat my mum. And then they separated, and my mum didn't want us to see my dad, but my dad never actually physically put his hands on any of us kids. He wouldn't even ground us or send us to our rooms or anything like that, whereas mum was the one who did all the grounding, did all the smacking, made us eat teas and whatnot, whereas because I was a picky eater, my dad used to say that I didn't have to eat my tea. And so like when they split up, I got to see my dad a few times. My mum didn't want it. But
How old were you? How old were you, Tessa?
I was 8 when they split up.
Okay.
And
were you very close to your dad?
Yeah, I was daddy's little girl.
Oh.
Okay. So even though your dad
daddy's
was
little
an
boy,
alcoholic,
I should say.
Yeah. Okay. So
I was
even though
his
your
little
dad's
tomboy.
You're a daddy's little tomboy. So even though
Yeah.
your dad was had alcohol issues, they separated. You still, do you agree that kids need both parents no matter what's going on with their issues, as long as they're safe and they're not hurting the child? Do you believe that children should see both parents?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
So you were 8 years old when your mum and dad separated, and your mum didn't really like you going over to see your dad?
No.
Oh, okay. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why?
I think it's just surrounding like her issues and that, because he was an alcoholic and he was abusive to her. But she also didn't like the fact that he didn't discipline us or anything like that. Like I said, he wouldn't send us to our rooms if we're naughty. He wouldn't do any of that. Like my dad, he always played with us like all the time. Like, would play hide and go seek chases and just all sorts at night time. All the kids from the neighborhood used to come over and join in, type thing. So like dad was sort of like the fun dad for us, but he was a bad husband to my mum.
So you had domestic violence in the house?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is a really contentious issue out there in the world at the moment. So Dawn, do you want to just elaborate on this at the moment? Like, some of the groups out there aren't happy if there's children going to see the other parent if there's been domestic violence in the house, and there are some very big split factions and very divided views about this. And what Tessa has just clearly said is that her dad was violent towards her mother, but not violent towards the children. She was very, very close to her dad. She was daddy's little tomboy, and she has clearly stated that children need to see both parents as long as the children aren't being hurt. What are you seeing in the court systems?
Well, there is a high level of contention when it comes to this kind of high conflict divorce, where it's used as a reason why one parent should be removed and not allowed to have that time with their children. And it also is used to basically remove their existence from their lives. Like they start over, maybe they remarry, and then it's just kind of just splits where they no longer have access to both parents. They're the ones that had those issues. If the children are still in a safe environment as far as they're concerned, that's the part where it gets really, hard to determine, are the children safe? If the children are safe, then the children still deserve to have access to both their parents. Just because dad was an awful husband doesn't mean he's an awful father, and vice versa. Sometimes, it's unfortunate, but we have the reverse of that as well, where they're better husbands and not as good as a father.
Yeah.
It's
so
hard.
So what are you thinking about that, Tessa? Because now that we've found out that you're an adult child of parental alienation, hashtag ACOD, so that's AKOD, adult kid of divorce. What is your opinion on what Dawn has just said there? If you were a child in court and you were hearing all of that sort of stuff, what's your voice around that?
Well, see, when they first separated and that, I was upset in that, because I wanted to see my dad and all that sort of stuff. And I would have done anything, obviously to have that happen and that. But unfortunately, in that same situation, a little while later, my dad ended up, he still, to the day he passed away in 2016, he still had never raised his hand to me or anything like that. He'd never, abused me or anything like in that aspect, like as in violently or verbally or anything. But then he ended up going heaps more downhill, and he was trying to be like a friend opposed to a dad, but then he ended up getting me drunk and stuff when I was nearly 9 and sending me home just to piss off my mum.
Wow. So he made some bad choices, obviously. And, to me, that doesn't warrant removing a parent. That means that parent may need some guidance and some, needs resources to redirect how they parent.
Yeah,
so
because
even
that is a form of child abuse with that way. But like Dawn said, is that enough to have you removed from not seeing him, even if you'd had contact visits with him under supervision, and while he had parenting classes to understand that was not a good choice with a child, that could have been put in place potentially, rather than like what happened after that?
Well, after that, my mum actually moved us to Queensland, from Tasmania to Queensland, to take us away from him.
Okay.
So
you were removed from Tasmania, and that's like Victoria, New South Wales. So 3 states away, which is how many miles? 3,000 kilometres away?
Yeah, about 3,000 kilometres.
About 3,000 for those who are international who might not be sure what we're referring to. So your mum moved you kids 3,000 kilometres away from your paternal father. So basically took you interstate. Were you allowed, was the court okay with that?
I don't even know if there was any court orders or anything. So
That's what I'm getting at. Like, did your dad know that that was what was going to happen, that the children would be taken that far away from him? And what was his mental health like after you kids? Because you said that you're his like girl boy, like tomboy, daddy's little girl tomboy. What was that like for him after you were moved away from him, and what was that like for you?
I think, well, because he ended up having a missus and then another child. So I think that sort of helped him cope a little bit in that way. But I ended up, because we moved to Queensland when I was 13, but then when I was 15, I ended up moving back to Tasmania to live with my dad.
Okay.
You reunited or
so
reconnected with him? I have a question for you about back when you were still all living together as a family. Did you witness the domestic violence or your dad abusing your mom? So you witnessed it. So what that is that's an adverse childhood experience. And this is something that here in the States that would be used against your dad to prove that he was causing trauma that they would try to use so that he couldn't be in your life. And like we were just talking a minute ago, is while that is bad and that should not happen, divorcing definitely probably will help alleviate that violence. But is it still enough to remove the children from his life and you from him, him from yours and you from his?
Yeah, which I don't think, it did warrant that situation. Like I said, a bit later on, he allowed me to drink because he was an alcoholic, and we used to sit down and play card games and stuff all the time. And or even when he was actually still with Mum, when we'd play hide and go seek chases and stuff, he used to leave his glass of alcohol on the back of his truck, and he'd have his swigs of his drinks and that as he played and whatnot. Well, at an early age, I realised that was there, and I'd go along and I'd have a swig, and keep going along and go back and have another swig, and I ended up being drunk one night and I fell off the shed roof.
Oh no.
Because I was drunk. And that was when my mum and dad were still together.
Oh my goodness.
And,
so he had some pretty loose boundaries around being a dad. So, like, what had happened to him as a child, Tessa? Because we're looking at intergenerational trauma here, aren't we?
His family will probably see this on the Facebook.
Okay, right. Let's not do that then. Okay. We don't have to.
I don't know if they knew about what was happening to him as a child. But he opened up to me a couple of years before he passed away, because he started to really get some severe mental illness and that happening, and he didn't want to live anymore and stuff like that. But he ended up opening up to me about a bit of a childhood trauma. I don't know, like I said, if the family actually knows about it and they've like hidden it, sort of thing, because unfortunately his family, they were not perfect by any means, but they acted perfect. They have lots of money and they're pretty snooty nosed, and they used to stop us from going to family functions and stuff because my mum left my dad and we had no money, sort of thing. So we wasn't in their sort of class, sort of thing.
So were they alienating you as well?
Yep. Yeah, they didn't want us, at the Christmas events and stuff like that, because they used to like have this big whole family Christmas things, where a lot of my dad's family would all come together, and celebrate Christmas and stuff. Well, we were told not to come and stuff, sort of thing, because they didn't want us there because my mum had left my dad and she didn't have money, and you know, all these other excuses for us not to be there, sort of thing.
So, honey, when your mum and dad separated and you couldn't see your dad, could you share what that space was like for you? With, I know there's stuff your dad was doing that weren't great choices, but like aside from all of that stuff, being a dad and your dad, what was that like, being taken away from him all that way? Like, could you still ring him? Could you still visit? What was the deal?
We couldn't visit, obviously, you know, because we need to get on an airplane to get there because of the water between Queensland and Tasmania. So, you know, there was no just, you know, get in the car and driving sort of thing. You had to fly. But I ended up, like, I was already a bit of a wild child and that growing up. Later on, when I was an adult, I was diagnosed with like depression and that, adult's depression as a child. Sort of thing. They told me I had like an adult's depression when I was a child, sort of thing. I don't quite understand it still myself, but at the time I didn't know what was going on with me. I was, you know, a bit wild and, you know, mood swings and off tap and depressed and whatever else. But my mum never took me to a counsellor or anything like that. And so I found out later on. But when I came to Queensland when I was 13, when we left my dad, I ended up doing it tenfold, like all the emotions and feelings, like I just couldn't handle. Like I was constantly wanting my dad and wanting to see him, like, you know, because he never abused me, and, you know, physically and sort of, you know, in them sort of ways, even though he did let me drink and get drunk, and I'd go home and spew up, and, you know, my mum wasn't impressed, and, you know, all that stuff. Like, but I always take that bad part of him letting me drinking out, because that was the only bad part that there was for me and him, if you know what I mean. The rest of it, you know, was beautiful, you know what I mean. Like, there was none of all of that. Whereas I grew up with my mum telling me she hated me and she blamed me for my dad assaulting her all the time when they were together, because I was daddy's little girl, and if I didn't want to eat my tea, I'd tell my dad I didn't want to eat my tea, and I'd end up in a physical altercation from it. I was like 1 and 2 at the time when I started to say I didn't want to eat my tea, and my mum still to this day will say that I knew what I was doing at that age, and I made my dad do it. I knew the consequences of me not eating my tea and telling my dad would result in her being bashed, etc. And she actually still thinks that to this day, that I was a smart kid and I knew exactly what was happening, exactly what I was doing. And, you know, like, looking at my 1 and 2 year olds at the time, they do not understand the consequences of saying they don't want to eat tea.
No,
so
that's horrible.
I grew up with a bad relationship with my mum, you know, because, you know, I was daddy's little girl and she blamed me for a lot of that stuff. And so I started smoking weed and I started drinking and, you know, wagging school and all that type of stuff. And then when I was 15, because we used to do square dancing when we was younger, there was a square dancing convention in Tasmania, and my mum was like, okay, we're going to go do this square dancing convention. And I seen that as an opportunity to stay in Tasmania once I got there. And so we went to the convention, and I absolutely refused to go back to Queensland with her. And I asked my dad if I can go and live with him, and he said yes. My mum, yet again, was not impressed. But yeah.
But if they didn't go to court, there was no court orders, then there wasn't a lot that they had to work with there.
As far as I know, there was never any court orders stopping us from actually seeing him or anything like that. It's just something she chose to do. And I think my dad, like, he didn't complete high school or anything like that. He ended up teaching himself how to fix TVs and cars and stuff, and that's how he made a living, as well as working on a farm all his life.
So he had you know what he knew, but you know he did have some questionable, you know, characteristics, right, of a father. That
and lack of boundaries.
That would be a concern. I can understand the concern.
Yes.
You know, that makes sense as far as questioning that. Also, it also makes sense, though, that if he had those resources or tools to understand what being a father really was, because like Alyse was saying, that transgenerational, what did he learn? How did he learn to be that father? That really does make a difference.
And did he have any opportunity? It sounds to me like he was operating in, if we look at the parent-adult-child model, it sounds like he was operating in child from a lot of the time. He was the fun dad. He was the one who couldn't put in boundaries. He was the one who really didn't know how to parent. And that, if I was to hypothesize, from a clinical psychotherapist point of view, I would be looking directly at what was his trauma, what's the intergenerational trauma in the family, what was he taught was normal in his family, how much communication did they have, what was his parenting of like his parents, how did they parent him, what was he exposed to. I'd be looking at all of that stuff, because if he isn't given the opportunity to go into that space and learn any of that stuff, where's the book on that, you know, like. And also the other question is, why was he drinking? Like, what trauma was he drinking to stop from coming through? And that is all stuff.
Say it though, like, because I really don't care what his family really thinks and that. I'm just worrying about honouring my dad, like, whether he wants me to say it or not. But
I know, I'm not suggesting that you do, but like, if that's what I'm suggesting should or could have happened, if that had happened, life would have been very different for him as a child, as a teenager, as an adult. And then when he moved into parenting and fatherhood, he would have had a different lens to look through, apart from a trauma lens. We don't even need to be mentioning what happened to your dad at all whatsoever. But
I do know that
the message is we just need to take into consideration nature versus nurture.
Yeah, I do know before he passed, he was looking at me for advice to go to court to have people charged and stuff. So,
so an historical charge.
Yeah. He was wondering, you know, if he was able to still do it, and I'm like, yeah, do it, like, sort of thing. So.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people, you know, mothers and fathers. This isn't just, you know, something that fathers do. Mothers have this as well. That we've have generations that have suffered so much trauma as children, and when they grow up and they start having families of their own, they've never resolved that, and it does become, you know, questionable as far as their parenting skills. So what do we do when we don't know how to do something? We teach how to do it. And I think that society in general, at least here in the States, they haven't really grasped the concept that they're not just a bad parent, they just don't know how to parent.
Would you say that about your dad? He just didn't know how to parent. But he, as far as love goes, if like on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 was like he didn't love you very much, whereas 10 was you knew you were the sun and the moon and the stars,
10.
where is he sitting on that scale?
10.
10.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Like
that's
I said, like,
what needs to
even
be
though
taken into
he let me drink,
consideration.
that was the only bad thing that I had from him. Like, apart from that, there was nothing else bad. And like, he ended up having got another girlfriend, and he had a child and that with her, and that he ended up being physically abusive to the mother, but never abusive to that child either.
So,
That child never received a smack or a growl or sent to a room.
so
You know,
what do you think? What do you think about
the same
children?
repeated situation with a different family? Like, so I can honestly say he wouldn't have hurt children, and maybe that stems from his childhood trauma, changing what happened with him as a child.
What would you say about children's having contact with a father like that when he was abusive towards your mother? How does that make you feel? And do you feel like it was that they should have divorced, but the contact should have still been there? Do you feel like it was safe for you to visit? What